Your suffering isn't making you interesting. It's not making you deep. It's not fuel for your art or proof of your sensitivity or evidence that you feel things more intensely than other people. It's just suffering. Plain, ugly, pointless. And the moment you stop wrapping it in pretty language and tragic narratives, the moment you see it for what it actually is, you lose the person you thought you were. And that loss is worse than the suffering ever was. Because at least the suffering had a story. At least it meant something. If you're tired of people treating pain like it's poetic, subscribe to Raw Existence right now. We don't romanticize anything here. We tell you what suffering actually looks like when you strip away the performance. Like this video, if you've ever caught yourself making your pain prettier than it was. Comment below and tell me what happened when you stopped calling your depression beautiful darkness. Let's talk about suffering without the poetry. There's a specific moment when you realize you've been performing your suffering. Not faking it. It's real, but performing it. Shaping it into something more palatable, more meaningful, more you. Turning your depression into aesthetic, your anxiety into sensitivity, your trauma into depth, and then one day you're sitting in actual pain and you catch yourself trying to make it beautiful and you just stop. And what's left when you stop is just pain. Not tragic pain, not meaningful suffering, not the kind of hurt that makes you more interesting at parties or gives you something to write about. Just the dull, grinding, pointless ache of being in a body and mind that aren't working right. And it's boring. Suffering, when you stop romanticizing it, is incredibly boring. I'm watching the field behind my house right now. Empty, grey, November. And I'm thinking about how the field doesn't romanticize its decay, doesn't turn the dying grass into metaphor, doesn't make winter mean something, just dies, just browns. Just sits there being dead vegetation until spring maybe brings it back. No narrative, no arc, no lesson learned from the dying. You probably had your moment too, where you were describing your pain to someone or writing about it or just thinking about it, and you noticed yourself using pretty words. Noticed yourself framing it as a journey or a dark night of the soul or some other phrase that makes suffering sound like it has purpose. And something in you just went, no, that's not what this is. This is just hurting. And hurting isn't poetic, it's just hurt. What did it feel like, that moment, when the story collapsed and you were left with just the experience? Here's what nobody wants to hear about Bukowski. He didn't drink because he was a tortured artist. Didn't drink because it fueled his writing or because he was so sensitive that sobriety was unbearable. He drank because he was an alcoholic. That's it. That's the whole truth. He had a disease that made him need alcohol to function. And the writing happened despite the drinking, not because of it, but we don't want that truth. Want to believe his suffering had purpose, that his alcoholism was somehow noble or necessary or part of his genius, that the pain was the price of the art. But it wasn't. The pain was just pain. The drinking was just addiction, and he would have written better sober. He said so himself, but he couldn't be sober, because he was an alcoholic. I wasn't much of a petty thief, he wrote. I wanted the whole world or nothing. And people read that as romantic, as proof of his passionate nature. But it's not romantic. It's the thinking of an addict. All or nothing, no middle ground, no moderation. Just the extremes that addiction requires to justify itself. The tortured artist narrative is a lie we tell because the truth is too mundane. The truth is, most artists are tortured because they have untreated mental illness or addiction or trauma. Not because they're artists. The art doesn't require the torture. The torture just happens to some people, and some of those people happen to make art. But we've reversed it. Made the suffering seem necessary, made it seem like you can't create without it. I knew a writer once who was genuinely talented, also genuinely depressed. And she refused treatment because she believed her depression was the source of her writing, believed that getting better would make her work shallow. So she stayed depressed, stayed in pain. And her work didn't get deeper, it got repetitive, because depression is repetitive. It's the same thoughts in the same loops, saying the same nothing over and over. She died. Not dramatically, not in some tragic artistic way, just stopped showing up to things, stopped answering messages. And a few weeks later, someone found her, and she'd left notebooks full of the same depressed thoughts she'd been having for 20 years. Nothing new, nothing profound, just depression documenting itself endlessly. And people at her memorial talked about how her sensitivity was too much for this world, how she felt things too deeply, how her art required her suffering. But that's not what happened. What happened is she had a treatable illness and chose not to treat it because she'd romanticized it into her identity. And the illness killed her, like untreated illnesses do. That's what happens when you romanticize suffering. You protect it, keep it, feed it, because you've made it mean something, made it part of your story, made it you, and then it kills you. Not poetically, just literally. Just ends your life the way diseases do when you don't treat them. Have you done that? Made your suffering too precious to let go of? Turned your pain into your personality? There's a specific kind of person who performs suffering as proof of depth. You know them. Maybe you've been them. They collect diagnoses like credentials, display their trauma like badges, turn every conversation into an opportunity to demonstrate how much they've endured, how complex their inner life is, how much more they understand about darkness than you do. And maybe they have suffered, probably they have. But somewhere along the way, the suffering became performance, became the interesting thing about them, became their value in social situations. And now they can't stop performing it, because without it, who are they? Just another person. Ordinary, unremarkable. Without the suffering, they disappear. This is different from people who are actually suffering and trying to cope. This is people who've turned suffering into aesthetic, into brand, into the thing that makes them special, and you can tell the difference. People who are actually in pain don't want to talk about it constantly, don't bring it up as proof of anything, just carry it quietly and wish they didn't have to. But the performers, they lead with it. As someone with complex PTSD, they'll say before giving an opinion about a movie, "My generational trauma," they'll mention when discussing where to eat dinner, making every moment about their pain, not because the pain is overwhelming, because the identity built on pain is all they have. And I'm not saying their pain isn't real. I'm saying they've made it realer than necessary, amplified it. Given it space, it doesn't actually take up, because somewhere they learned that suffering equals depth. That pain makes you interesting. That trauma is currency in a world that values authentic experience, but it's not. Suffering doesn't make you deep. Depression doesn't make you profound. Trauma doesn't make you wise. They just make you someone who's suffered and is depressed and is traumatized. That's all. The depth comes from what you do with it or despite it, not from the suffering itself. I'm sitting on my porch right now, same porch that's been slowly rotting for 5 years. And I'm thinking about how the rot doesn't make the porch interesting, doesn't give it character or depth or story, just makes it a rotting porch. Eventually it'll rot through completely, and I'll have to replace it. And the new porch won't have the rot, won't have the character, will just be a functional porch. And that'll be better. That's what happens when you stop romanticizing. You realize the rot is just rot, the damage is just damage, and fixing it doesn't mean losing something precious, just means having something that works instead of something that's broken. But the people who perform suffering can't accept that. Can't imagine being fixed because being broken is their whole identity. So they stay broken, protect the breaking, make it mean something it doesn't mean, and call it depth. Do you know someone like this? Are you someone like this? Can you tell the difference anymore? Here's the terrifying truth. Once you stop romanticizing your suffering, you realize it doesn't make you special, doesn't make you different or interesting or deep. Everyone suffers. Everyone's depressed or anxious or traumatized or broken in some way. Your suffering is completely ordinary, common, unremarkable. And that realization is worse than the suffering itself, because at least when you were romanticizing it, your pain had meaning, had purpose, made you who you were. But when you strip away the narrative, when you see suffering as just suffering, you're left with the fact that you're in pain, and it doesn't mean anything, and everyone else is too, and none of it makes any of us special. You thought your depression made you see deeper, made you understand things other people don't understand. But it didn't. It just made you depressed. Other people see just as deep without being depressed. Some people see deeper. Your mental illness wasn't insight, was just illness. You thought your anxiety made you more aware, more sensitive to threats and subtleties, but it didn't. It just made your nervous system malfunction, made you see threats that aren't there, made you exhausting to be around because everything feels like an emergency to you when nothing actually is. You thought your trauma made you stronger, made you a survivor, made you someone who's been through things. But everyone's been through things. Everyone has trauma. Yours isn't worse or more significant or more formative. It's just what happened to you, and it damaged you. And that damage doesn't make you special, just makes you damaged. This is the loss nobody prepares you for. The loss of specialness. The loss of being the person whose suffering means something. When you stop romanticizing, you become ordinary. Just another person in pain, trying to get through the day. No more interesting than anyone else. No more deep. No more complex. Just hurt. Just broken. Just trying. And for some people that loss of specialness is unbearable, was the person whose pain made them interesting, the one whose darkness was compelling, the one people wanted to save or understand or figure out. And without that, they're just someone, anyone, unremarkable, so they go back to romanticizing, go back to making the suffering mean something, go back to performing depth, because being ordinarily hurt is worse than being specially hurt, because at least special hurt has value. But here's what they don't tell you about being ordinarily hurt. It's actually more honest, more real, closer to what suffering actually is for most people. Not tragic, not poetic, just hard. Just something you're dealing with while also doing laundry and paying bills and existing in a body that hurts for no good reason. The field outside doesn't need to be special to justify existing, doesn't need its decay to mean something. Just decays and exists, and that's enough. Not because it's learned acceptance or found peace, because it's a field. Fields don't need justification, neither do you. Your suffering doesn't need to make you special for you to be allowed to exist. You can just be someone who's hurting, ordinarily, unremarkably, and that can be enough. Or if it's not enough, it's at least honest. Can you survive being ordinary? Can your ego handle not being special because you suffer? Pain is what's happening in your body and mind right now. Story is what you tell yourself about why it's happening and what it means. And most of what we call suffering is actually story, is the narrative we've wrapped around the pain to make it bearable or meaningful or ours. I have a friend with chronic pain, real physical pain. Her body is destroying itself slowly through autoimmune disease, and she tried for years to make it mean something, tried to find the lesson in it, the growth, the purpose. Tried to be the person whose suffering made her more compassionate or wise or grateful for good days. And then one day she just stopped trying to make it mean anything, and she told me it was the worst day of her life, because she was left with just the pain, no story about warrior spirits or battles or journeys, just her body hurting, every day, for no reason, with no end, and no meaning to any of it. The story was the only thing making it bearable, she said. And when I lost the story, I was left with just the pain. And pain without story is just pain, and it's so much worse. That's what happens when you stop romanticizing. The pain doesn't go away, doesn't get better. You just lose the narrative that made it feel like it was for something, and you're left holding pure suffering with no meaning attached. just the experience of hurting without any reason for the hurt to justify itself. Nietzsche talked about this. That which does not kill us makes us stronger, he wrote, and everyone quotes it like it's true, like suffering always leads to growth. But that's not what he meant, and it's not what actually happens. Sometimes what doesn't kill you just damages you, just makes you weaker and more broken and more unable to handle the next thing. Sometimes suffering is just suffering, doesn't make you stronger, doesn't teach you anything, doesn't build character or resilience or wisdom, just hurts you, just takes from you, just makes tomorrow harder than yesterday was. And there's no story in that, no arc, no lesson, no redemption, just loss. And we can't accept that. Can't accept that sometimes pain is meaningless. So we invent meanings, create narratives, build stories that make the suffering serve a purpose. And those stories become more real to us than the actual pain. Become what we're protecting, become what we can't let go of. But the pain is separate from the story. You can have pain without narrative, suffering without meaning, hurt without lesson. And when you strip away the story, when you see pain as just pain, you realize most of what you've been carrying isn't the pain itself. It's the story about the pain, the meaning you've attached, the identity you've built, and losing that identity is its own kind of suffering, is its own loss. Because who are you without your pain story? Without the narrative that explains why you are the way you are, without the suffering that justifies your behavior and choices and failures, you're just someone whose body or mind isn't working right, just someone in pain, just someone trying to cope. And that's not a story, that's just reality. And reality, when you stop embellishing it, is deeply unsatisfying. The grass outside is growing and dying without story, without narrative about what the growth means or what the dying teaches. Just biological processes happening, because that's what happens to grass, and the grass seems fine, doesn't seem to need its existence to be about anything. But you need your existence to be about something. Need your suffering to have participated in making you who you are. And when you realize it didn't, when you realize the suffering was just random damage that happened to your nervous system for no good reason, you lose not just the story, but the you that the story created. What are you without your suffering narrative? Have you ever tried to find out? When you stop romanticizing your suffering, you experience an identity crisis that nobody prepares you for, because you've built yourself around your pain. Made it the interesting thing about you, the thing that explains you, the foundation of your personality. And when you take that away, what's left? I knew someone who'd built their entire identity on childhood trauma. Every conversation, every decision, every relationship filtered through the lens of what happened to them when they were young. They went to therapy, did the work, started healing, and then had a complete breakdown because they didn't know who they were without the trauma defining them. I was the person that happened to, they told me. I was the survivor, the one who overcame. And when I actually processed it and let it go, I didn't know who I was anymore. I was just no one, just a regular person with no story. And they couldn't handle it, couldn't handle being ordinary, so they found new trauma, created new suffering, manufactured crisis after crisis because crisis was familiar, was their identity, was the only version of themselves they knew how to be. This is what romanticizing does, makes suffering so central to who you are that healing feels like dying, makes pain so core to your identity that letting it go means losing yourself. And for some people, that loss is more terrifying than the pain ever was, because pain, when you've romanticized it, is known, is yours, is the thing that makes you you. But who are you without it? Just another person going to work and coming home and living a life that isn't defined by anything dramatic, just ordinary existence. And if you've spent years believing your suffering made you special, ordinary existence feels like erasure. Your depression wasn't just depression. It was your depth, your sensitivity, your ability to see what others miss. And without it, you're just what? Happy, content, shallow? You don't know. You've never been that person. Your anxiety wasn't just anxiety. It was your awareness, your ability to sense danger, your survival instinct. And without it, you're just what? Calm, relaxed, careless. You don't know how to be that. Your trauma wasn't just trauma. It was your story, your origin, your explanation for why you are the way you are. And without it, you're just what? Healed, whole, undefined. You don't recognize that person, so you hold on to the pain. Romanticize it, make it precious, make it you. Because losing it means losing the only version of yourself you know. And starting over as a different person feels impossible when you're already in your 30s or 40s or 50s and you've built a whole life around being the person who suffered. I'm watching a bird right now. It's just sitting on a branch. And I'm wondering if the bird has ever experienced an identity crisis, if it's ever wondered who it would be if it weren't a bird. Probably not. The bird is just being a bird, not questioning whether being a bird is the right version of itself, just existing as what it is without needing to be anything else. But you need to be something. Need to have an identity, need to know who you are. And if suffering has been your identity for years, letting it go feels like suicide, like killing the person you've been. Even if that person was miserable, at least they were someone. At least you knew them. And maybe the person on the other side of healing is better. Maybe they're healthier and happier and more functional. But they're a stranger. And becoming a stranger to yourself is its own kind of death. Is its own loss that no one talks about because we're supposed to want to heal, supposed to want to let go of suffering. But what if you don't know who you are without it? What if the suffering is the only interesting thing about you? What if letting it go means becoming boring? These are the questions nobody asks out loud, the fears nobody admits. Because admitting you don't want to heal because you don't know who you'd be if you weren't broken, that makes you sound crazy. Makes you sound like you're choosing suffering. But you're not choosing it. You're just afraid of who you'd be without it. Have you felt that fear? That terror of healing, of becoming someone you don't recognize? Here's another thing that happens when you stop romanticizing. You realize how much of your suffering has been performed for an audience, how much of it has been about being seen as someone who suffers. And when you stop performing, when you just suffer privately without making it visible, you realize how little of it you actually need to carry. Most suffering, when you're romanticizing it, is public. You post about your dark thoughts, share your struggles, let people know you're going through it, not because you need help, because you need witnesses, need people to see you suffering and acknowledge that you're complex and deep and struggling with heavy things. But suffering without audience is different, is quieter, is less dramatic, because there's no one to perform for, no one to convince of your depth, just you and the pain and the getting through it or not getting through it. And when there's no audience, you realize most of what you were calling suffering was actually the performance of suffering. The actual pain, when you strip away the performance, is smaller than you thought, more manageable, less all-consuming, because you're not amplifying it for effect, not exaggerating it to make sure people understand how bad it is, just experiencing it, just carrying it. And it turns out you can carry more than you thought when you're not also carrying the performance. I know someone who used to post constantly about their mental health struggles. Every bad day was documented. Every anxiety attack was shared. Every depressive episode was performed for their followers, and they'd get comments, support, validation, proof that their suffering mattered, that people cared, that they were worth caring about because they were visibly struggling. Then they took a break from social media, just stopped posting, and their mental health weirdly improved. Not because the problems went away, but because they stopped performing them, stopped amplifying them for an audience, just dealt with them privately. And without the performance, the problems became smaller, more manageable, less central to their identity. I realized I was making myself worse, they told me. Every time I posted about how bad I felt, I was reinforcing how bad I felt, making it more real, more solid, more me. And when I stopped posting, I could just feel bad for a bit and then feel better, without making it a thing, without making it my whole personality. That's what the audience does. Make suffering more real, more solid, more permanent. Because you've announced it, made it public, made it part of how people know you, and now you have to maintain it, have to keep being the person who's struggling because that's who you told everyone you were. But suffering without audience is temporary, can come and go, can be bad some days and fine others, doesn't have to be consistent or documented or explained, just happens, just passes, just exists without needing to mean anything to anyone, including you. The field outside suffers through winter every year, gets frozen, gets covered in snow, dies back, but it doesn't announce its suffering, doesn't need witnesses, just suffers and then doesn't, and then suffers again. And the suffering is real, but it's not performed, not made into story, not shared for validation. And maybe that's healthier. Maybe suffering is supposed to be private, carried quietly, dealt with alone or with a few trusted people, not broadcast, not performed, not made into content or narrative or proof of anything. When you stop romanticizing, you lose the audience. Stop sharing, stop performing, just suffer when you suffer, and stop when you stop. And it's lonely sometimes, but it's also honest, more honest than the performance ever was. Can you suffer without an audience? Can your pain exist if no one sees it? Does it matter less if it's not witnessed? Here's the thing nobody tells you. When you stop romanticizing your suffering, there's relief, uncomfortable, guilty relief. Because maintaining the romance was exhausting, keeping up the performance, making your pain mean something, carrying the identity of someone who suffers beautifully. It was work, constant work. And when you stop, you realize how tired you were. But you feel guilty about the relief. Because relief means the suffering wasn't as bad as you made it seem, means you were exaggerating, means you were, in some way, lying. Not about the pain being real, but about how much space it needed to take up, how much attention it needed, how central it needed to be to everything. And that guilt is complicated, because maybe you did need the romance for a while. Maybe the story was the only thing keeping you alive when the pain was worst. Maybe performing it was how you survived it. But at some point, the performance stopped being survival and became habit, became identity, became the thing you were protecting instead of the thing protecting you. And now you've stopped, and the relief is huge. And you don't know what to do with it, because feeling better after stopping the performance means the performance was making it worse, means you were participating in your own suffering, not causing it, but amplifying it, making it bigger than it needed to be. I spent years making my depression poetic, writing about it, talking about it, making it beautiful, and I thought I was processing it, thought I was coping by turning it into art. But I was actually feeding it, giving it space, making it more solid, more real, more me. And when I stopped, when I just let myself be depressed without making it meaningful, the depression got smaller. Not gone, but smaller, more manageable, more like weather. Just a thing that happens sometimes. Not a defining characteristic, not my depth, not my sensitivity, just a malfunction in my brain chemistry that makes some days harder than others. And the relief of that was enormous and uncomfortable, because it meant I'd been making myself worse for years, not intentionally, but through the romance, through the story, through the meaning I kept attaching to something that didn't need meaning, just needed treatment. This is the relief you're not supposed to feel. The relief of realizing you're more okay than you thought, that your suffering was real, but the story around it was optional, that you can just be hurt sometimes without it being your whole identity, that you can have bad days without them being dark nights of the soul, but admitting that relief feels like betraying past you. The you who needed the romance to survive. The you who made the suffering mean something because meaningless suffering was unbearable. You feel guilty for outgrowing the narrative, for letting go of the story that kept you alive when the story was all you had. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you needed the romance then and don't need it now. Maybe the story served its purpose and now you can let it go. Maybe growing out of romanticizing your suffering is actually healing, even if it feels like betrayal, even if it feels like lying about how bad it was. The grass outside doesn't feel guilty when winter ends, doesn't apologize for greening again, doesn't explain that winter was really hard and the cold really hurt, but now it's spring and it's growing again. Just grows, just lives, just exists without needing to justify the transition from suffering to not suffering. Maybe you can be like that, can suffer and then not suffer, and not feel guilty about the relief. Can let the romance go and feel better and not explain or justify or apologize. Can just be someone who was hurt and now is less hurt, and that's the whole story. Can you accept the relief? Can you stop suffering without feeling guilty about stopping? When you stop romanticizing your suffering, when you let the story die, you're left with just yourself. The actual you. Not the you that suffering made interesting, not the you that pain defined, just the you that exists without the narrative. And that person might be different than you thought, might be more boring, might be more functional, might be someone you don't recognize, and you have to decide if you can be that person, if you can exist without the suffering making you special, without the pain giving you identity, without the romance giving you depth. Can you just be, what, normal, healthy, unremarkable? Can that be enough? For some people it can't. They need the drama, need the intensity, need the suffering to make life feel real. Without it, life feels flat, feels empty, feels like nothing's happening, even though everything's fine. And fine isn't enough when you're used to tragic. They go back to the romance, find new suffering to attach meaning to, create drama where there isn't any, manufacture crisis, because crisis feels like living and calm feels like dying, because they've trained themselves to equate intensity with aliveness. And without intensity, they don't know how to feel alive. But some people can make the transition, can learn to exist without the romance, can find that life without dramatic suffering is actually fine. Maybe better than fine, maybe peaceful, maybe boring in a way that's restful instead of deadening, maybe ordinary in a way that's sustainable instead of forgettable. What's left when the story dies is just your life, the actual events of your days, the relationships you have or don't have, the work you do or don't do, the small pleasures and small pains that make up actual living instead of narrative living. And it's not exciting, not compelling, not the kind of thing you'd write about or tell people at parties, but it's real. More real than the romance ever was. More honest, more sustainable, more like what being alive actually is for most people most of the time. Not tragic, not poetic, just existing, getting through, having moments that are okay and moments that aren't, and not needing any of it to mean more than it means. I'm sitting on this rotting porch, watching this ordinary field under this grey sky, and nothing about this moment is romantic. Nothing about it is deep or meaningful or worth documenting. It's just a moment, me existing in it. And when this moment ends, another moment will happen, and then another, and most of them will be like this. Unremarkable, unromantic, just what's happening, and I can be okay with that. Can exist in these unremarkable moments without needing them to be more, can suffer when suffering happens without making it beautiful, can be happy when happiness happens without questioning whether happiness means I'm shallow now, can just be, without the story, without the romance, without the need for any of it to be about anything except just being alive until I'm not. That's what's left, just existence, raw existence, without the poetry, without the meaning, without the narrative. Just the actual experience of being conscious in a body for a while, and it's enough. Or if it's not enough, it's honest. And honesty after years of romance feels like relief. What would be left for you? If you stripped away the story, what would your life actually be? Can you look at it without the romance? Can you accept what you see? Animals suffer without romanticizing. They hurt and they heal, or they don't heal, and none of it means anything to them. They're not learning lessons from their suffering, not growing from their pain, not becoming deeper, more complex beings because something bad happened to their bodies. They just hurt, and then eventually stop hurting, or don't stop. And either way, they don't make it mean anything. Watch a dog with a broken leg. It limps, it hurts. You can see the pain, but the dog isn't having an existential crisis about the pain. Isn't wondering what the broken leg means, or what it says about the dog's character, or how it's changing the dog's relationship to movement. Just has a broken leg, needs it to heal, is uncomfortable until it does. That's the whole story. And we're supposed to be smarter than dogs, more complex, more evolved, but maybe we're just more confused. Maybe the ability to make meaning is actually the problem. Maybe suffering is supposed to just be suffering, just a thing that happens sometimes. Just pain that needs to heal or doesn't heal, and adding meaning to it doesn't help, just makes it heavier, makes it last longer, makes it more than it needs to be. There's a cat that lives in the field behind my house, feral, has been there for years, and I've watched it get injured, seen it limping, seen it thin when it couldn't hunt well, seen it recover and get fat again when hunting was good. And through all of it, the cat has just continued, hasn't made its suffering mean anything. Hasn't let injury become identity, just healed or didn't heal and moved on, and the cat seems fine, seems more functional than most people I know, because the cat isn't carrying stories about its suffering, isn't defining itself by what hurt it, isn't romanticizing its struggle to survive, just surviving, just existing, just being a cat doing cat things until it's dead. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do, just be humans doing human things until we're dead. And sometimes human things include suffering, include pain and depression and anxiety and trauma. But those things don't need to be the point, don't need to be our depth or our identity or our story. They're just things that happen to bodies and minds sometimes, like broken legs happen to dogs, painful, real, but not meaningful. Man is the only animal that blushes, Mark Twain wrote, or needs to. And maybe man is also the only animal that romanticizes, or needs to. Because we can't just exist, can't just be bodies moving through time, need our existence to be about something, need our pain to mean something, need our suffering to transform us, or teach us, or make us special. But animals don't need that. And they seem okay, seem more at peace with existence than we are. Because they're not trying to make existence into a story, not trying to extract meaning from random events, just living, just existing, just being what they are without needing to be more. And maybe we could be like that, could let suffering just be suffering, let pain just be pain, let our bodies and minds malfunction without making the malfunction into narrative, could just exist, heal when healing happens, hurt when hurt happens, and not need any of it to be about anything except just the experience of being alive in a body that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. The field outside doesn't need its winter to make it strong for spring, doesn't need its suffering to build character, just winters, just springs, just exists through seasons without needing the seasons to mean anything. And it's fine. It's a field. Being a field. That's enough. Maybe being human can be enough too. Without the romance, without the story, without the meaning, just being human. Hurting sometimes. Healing sometimes. Existing until not existing. And letting that be the whole truth. Can you be animal honest about your suffering? Can you let it just be pain without making it poetry? There are people who never romanticize their suffering, who experienced pain and trauma and difficulty and never once tried to make it beautiful, never once thought it made them special or deep or interesting, just experienced it as the shit thing it was and tried to get through it and moved on when they could. And you know what? Those people are usually more functional than the romanticizers, more stable, more capable of happiness. Because they never attached their identity to their suffering, never made pain into personality, just had problems, dealt with problems as best they could, and continued existing. They're not more boring, not more shallow, not less capable of depth or complexity or feeling. They just didn't confuse suffering with those things, didn't think pain was required for profundity, didn't believe you had to be broken to be interesting. I know a woman who had a genuinely horrible childhood. Abuse, neglect, things that would justify decades of therapy and identity built on trauma. And she went to therapy, processed it, and then moved on. Didn't make the trauma her whole story. Didn't introduce herself as a survivor. Didn't need people to know about her past to understand her present. Just dealt with it and continued being a person who exists in the world. And people think she's in denial, think she hasn't really processed it, think she's repressing or avoiding or not letting herself feel the full weight of what happened because she's not performing the trauma, not making it visible, not building her identity on having survived difficult things. But she's not in denial, she's just not romanticizing. She experienced horrible things, they affected her, she got help. She integrated the experiences into her life, and then she kept living, without needing the horrible things to define her, without needing to be known primarily as someone who suffered. And she's fine, happy even, has relationships, has work she cares about, has a life that's not organized around trauma or defined by suffering, has days that are hard and days that are good and mostly days that are just days. And she doesn't need the hard days to make the good days meaningful. They're just different kinds of days. That's what it looks like to never romanticize. To just experience pain as pain and deal with it as well as you can and move forward. Not dramatically, not poetically, just practically, just humanly, just honestly. And most of the world is like this. Most people suffer and cope and continue without making it a narrative, without turning their pain into identity, without romanticizing. They just live, have problems, deal with problems, have more problems, deal with those. And none of it is their personality, none of it is their depth. It's just the stuff that happens while you're alive. The romanticizers are actually the minority, are actually the weird ones. Because most people understand instinctively that suffering isn't meant to be beautiful, isn't meant to be your identity, is just the hard part of being alive that you get through or don't get through, and either way, it doesn't need to mean more than it means. But if you've been romanticizing for years, these people seem alien, seem like they're not feeling deeply enough, like they're not engaging with their pain the way pain should be engaged with. Like they're missing something important by not making their suffering significant. But they're not missing anything. They're just being honest, just experiencing pain as pain. And that honesty looks like shallowness to someone who's spent years making pain deep. Looks like denial to someone who's spent years making suffering their identity. Looks like not feeling to someone who's confused suffering with feeling. But it's not any of those things. It's just not romanticizing, just experiencing life as it is, including the painful parts, without needing the painful parts to be anything except painful. The field has never romanticized its suffering. The grass has never made dying poetic. And they seem fine, seem at peace with the cycle of growth and death and growth, because they're not trying to make the cycle mean anything. Just experiencing it, just being grass and field, that's enough. Maybe you could be like them, could stop romanticizing, could just experience pain as pain, could let suffering be suffering without making it your personality, could be someone who hurts sometimes and heals sometimes and exists all the time without needing any of it to be more than it is. Have you met these people? The ones who never romanticized? Do they seem free to you or shallow? Can you tell the difference? So what actually happens when you stop romanticizing your suffering? You lose the story. You lose the identity. You lose the depth you thought pain gave you. You lose the audience. You lose the performance. You lose the romance. And you're left with just you, the actual you, unadorned by suffering, undefined by pain, just a person existing. And that person might disappoint you, might be more boring than you thought, less complex, less interesting, just someone going through days, having experiences, some hard, some easy, most ordinary, none of it meaning more than it means, or that person might surprise you, might be more functional than you thought, more capable of joy, more able to connect with others without pain being the bridge, more present, more alive, more actually feeling things instead of performing feeling things. Either way, that person is more honest, more real, more sustainable, because they're not carrying the weight of narrative, not performing their existence, not making every moment about whether it fits the story, just living, just being, just continuing until not continuing. And continuing without romance is different, is quieter, is less dramatic, but it's also less exhausting, because you're not constantly maintaining the performance, not constantly making pain mean something, not constantly proving you're deep enough or damaged enough or suffering enough to justify existing. You can just exist, without justification, without the suffering making you special, without the pain giving you identity, just here, just alive, just a consciousness in a body for a while, and that's enough. Or if it's not enough, it's honest. And honesty, after years of romance, feels like coming home to a home you didn't know existed. I'm watching the field right now. Same field I've watched for years. And it's just being a field. Not becoming a field. Not trying to be a better field. Not suffering beautifully or growing meaningfully. Just being, existing, continuing. And it looks peaceful. Not dramatically peaceful. Just at peace, with being what it is, without needing to be more. And maybe that's what happens next. You become peaceful. Not dramatically, not poetically, just at peace with being what you are, without needing suffering to make you interesting, without needing pain to give you depth, without needing romance to make existence bearable, just being. Suffering when suffering happens, but not making it mean more than it means. Healing when healing happens without making it redemptive. Existing through all of it without needing any of it to be about anything, except just the experience of being alive. That's what happens when you stop romanticizing your suffering. You become honest. You become ordinary. You become just you. Without the story, without the romance, without the need for any of it to be more than it is. And it's scary, and it's boring, and it's lonely sometimes, but it's real. More real than the romance ever was, more true, more sustainable, more like what being alive actually is when you strip away the performance. What happens next is you keep living, without the story, without the romance, without the suffering making you special, just living, just being, just continuing. And that's enough. Or if it's not enough, it's honest. And honesty, brutal and boring as it is all we've got. So stop romanticizing, stop performing, stop making your suffering beautiful. Just suffer when you suffer. Just heal when you heal. Just exist when you exist. And let that be the whole truth. The field is still being a field. The grass is still growing and dying without meaning. And you can be like them, can just be human, without the poetry, without the romance, without the need for any of it to mean more than it means. Can you do that? Can you stop romanticizing and just be? So that's what happens. When you stop romanticizing your suffering, you lose the story, lose the identity, lose the performance, and you're left with just yourself, the actual you, without the drama, without the romance, without the need for your pain to make you special. If this landed, if you recognized yourself in the romanticizing, subscribe to raw existence. We're not here to help you make your suffering beautiful. We're here to help you see it for what it actually is. Pain. Just pain. Nothing more. Nothing less. Like this video, if you've ever caught yourself performing your pain, if you've ever made your depression aesthetic, or your anxiety your personality, or your trauma your identity, if you've ever realized you were protecting your suffering because you didn't know who you'd be without it, and comment below. Tell me what happened when you stopped romanticizing. Tell me who you were when the story died. Tell me if you're more boring now or more honest. Tell me if the relief felt guilty. Tell me if you can exist without the romance, or if you went back to it because ordinary was unbearable. I want to know. I read every comment. We're all trying to figure out how to suffer honestly in a world that wants pain to be poetic. And maybe we can figure it out together. Thanks for being here. For 40 minutes. For sitting with the uncomfortable truth that your suffering isn't making you special, isn't giving you depth, is just making you suffer. And that's all it's doing, and recognizing that is the first step to actually dealing with it instead of performing it. See you in the next one, or not. Either way, the field will still be here. The grass will still grow without meaning, and we'll still be trying to figure out how to be human without romanticizing what being human actually costs. Stop making it beautiful, just let it be what it is. Pain, real, boring, honest, yours, but not you, never you, just something happening to you that you deal with. And then keep living without the romance. It's harder, but it's honest, and honest is all we've got.